We are going
Recording in progress.
to calling to order our architectural board review for October 17th. Start with a roll call, please.
Thank you, Chair Moore. I'll go ahead and take a roll call. Chair Moore. Vice Chair Six.
Here.
Board Member Anderson.
Here.
Board Member Black.
Here.
Board Member Noon.
Here.
Board Member Olson.
Here.
Board Member Whalen.
Here.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, moving on to general business and public comment. Do we have anyone who would like to speak?
Thank you, Chair Moore. I do not have anyone participating via Zoom. So yeah, and I also did not receive any written correspondence for any general business.
All right, we will close public comment and go to approval of the minutes from October 3rd. If we could have those up there. If we could scroll down. Did anyone have any comments or edits at this time? Okay, well, I will move for approval of the minutes as presented.
Second.
Okay. Then let's.
Thank you. I'll take the roll call vote. Chair Moore.
Yes.
Vice Chair Six.
Yes.
Board Member Anderson.
Yes.
Board Member Black.
Yes.
Board Member Noon.
Yes.
Board Member Olson. And Board Member Whalen.
Yes.
Perfect. Motion passes. Thank you.
Okay, and then the consent calendar for October 10th, please.
All right. Okay, thank you, Chair Moore. So we had reviewers, Board Member Noon was the reviewer on October 10th, and we had 1212 Coast Village Road. It received, let's see, project design approval and final approval as submitted. There's 921 Medio Road. This was continued indefinitely with the following comments, as you can see on screen. And then 224 South Milpas Street received project design approval and final approval as submitted. And that concludes the minutes for October 10th consent.
Move we accept.
Okay,
Second.
second, any discussion? No? Okay, let's vote.
Thank you, Chair Moore. I'll take the roll call vote. Chair Moore.
Yes.
Vice Chair Six.
Yes.
Board Member Anderson.
Yes.
Board Member Black.
Yes.
Board Member Noon.
Yes.
Board Member Olson. And Board Member Whalen.
Yes.
Motion passes. Thank you.
Okay, and then today's.
Okay, so thank you, Chair Moore. So we have the consent minutes from October 17th. Today, we had reviewers, board members Noon and Black and Olson present. 500 James Fowler Road, which is the airport, so that's a City of Santa Barbara project. It was requesting project design approval, but the project was continued 4 weeks with the following comments. This was something specific. They brought a design in, but they wanted to get comments on alternative design or other options if that wasn't going to be sufficient enough. So there was additional, so it was continued with the support for the alternative location number 2. And then secondly, my mouse isn't working, item B, 1021 St. Andres Street. This was continued 2 weeks with the following comments. And this one is a little bit awkward too. It was a project that was requesting to sub out vinyl windows and just a couple of vinyl windows and elements on the exterior. Generally, we wouldn't even bring this to the consent, but it didn't meet our administrative design staff approvals, and we tried to advise the applicant to just replace like for regular maintenance, but they continued to want to provide vinyl windows, so that kicked it up to a public hearing at consent. So more to come on that. I don't know if the other board members wish to say anything else about that.
Second.
Okay, any discussion about that? Yes, Mr. Wynn.
Sorry, not on that point, but on the airport project.
It would have been helpful to know what the airport expansion plans were, since they negated or affected some of the other site choices. And then beyond that, it's really not clear to me why the existing location doesn't serve the purpose, other than it's just too far away. But that's my comments.
Okay. Anything else?
Response to that.
Sure.
The concept plans are not finished yet. So we encourage them to include this expansion of the Sarah in the new concept plans. And the current Sarah facility is not large enough.
Wait, I'm sorry, I think that's to speak into the mic, please.
Very sorry, I didn't have it on. You want me to start over?
Yes, but if you, just briefly, and if you could speak into the mic, I think it'll help.
It will, it'll help if I turn it on.
And that too, that too.
So the current site is not large enough for the FAA, and we encourage them to bring it, to do this temporarily, and then come back with a expanded Sarah facility on their concept plans for the enlargement of the airport.
Okay. If that's everything, we can take our vote.
Thank you, Chair Moore. I'll take the roll call vote. Chair Moore,
Yes.
Vice Chair Six,
Yes.
Board Member Anderson,
Yes.
Board Member Black,
Yes.
Board Member Noon,
Yes.
Board Member Olson,
Yes.
and Board Member Whalen.
Yes.
Motion passes. Thank you.
Okay, and then any announcements from staff?
Mr. Chair, other than Mr. Russell is out today, so I will be staffing this meeting. Other than that.
Okay, thank you. Any future agenda items or appeals? No?
None, thank you.
Okay. And that's also this is also a chance for board members to request future agenda items as well at this time?
Absolutely, if,
So-
yeah.
If there's anything on your mind that you would like to encourage staff to bring before us or have them think about, this is the time to do that. Mr. Whalen?
On that point, I was watching one of the other city committees, I think it was HLC, where they had quite a detailed presentation on the formalities of running a meeting, making a motion. If that's in the realm of possibilities, I would enjoy having that presentation made to this board.
Yes, Mr. Chair, through you to Board Member Whalen. Yes, that was the Single Family Design Board, and as part of the Brown Act training, and that is, I'd be happy to follow up and ask the city attorney to do that, because things change a little bit, or there are different policies and things just to be conscious of as a board. It's important, so I'd be happy to do that.
Thank you.
Vice Chair Six?
Yeah, it might behoove us to have that conversation after December, when we receive a new member.
Yes, concur.
Okay. Any subcommittee reports? No? Okay.
And, Mr. Chair, I know earlier I had mentioned that we could switch items 2 and 3, but I actually see the 2 people here for item number 1.
Great.
Yes, so I'm wondering if we can just stick to the agenda. We don't even have to have a pause.
That's great. Well, then let's move on to item number 1, if we could.
What's that? Why, because it's so high? Or because it's black? That's what you wanted me to say before. You did last time.
We've been in a couple commission meetings today, so we're a little.
Do you all remember how to do the slideshow that doesn't do the presenter mode?
What do you mean?
Just the present. does. It is. Okay, so this is item number 1. This is a discussion item on the solar electric vehicle legislative update. And looks like you have 15 minutes, so hopefully you've done it a couple times, it sounds like already, so
Yes.
welcome. If you could introduce yourself and take us through that.
Sure. I'm Melissa Hetrick, Acting Energy and Climate Manager. And with me today is Dan Henschke, Assistant City Attorney, and then also Ms. Kukinda.
I'm also joining this conversation.
She's part of the presenters. In any case, today I'm here to speak with you about permitting for solar systems and electric vehicle charging systems, where we've had a lot of legislative activity recently. So just by way of background, I'm sure your board knows that permitting for solar systems has been streamlined for a long time. So since 1978, when the Solar Rights Act was passed, and there's been a lot of following legislation that has progressed over time. Our SB Municipal Code 2291 currently incorporates streamlining provisions contained in the State Government Code Section 65850.5. So as the state legislature changes that government code section, it's incorporated by reference into our municipal code, so it's essentially effective immediately. In that state code system, solar energy systems only need ministerial approvals unless specific threats to public health and safety can be identified. That section prohibits design review specifically for aesthetic purposes for solar energy systems. But it does say that there can be objective development standards in place that address health and safety. So many of our sections of our municipal code, most of the zoning code would still apply because those are considered to be implementing health and safety concerns. So in 2021, the legislature passed AB 1124 that greatly expanded the definition of what is a solar energy system. So solar collectors or panels were always exempt, or for a long time now, exempt from design review. But now, in addition to the actual panels, also exempt are associated support structures and foundations, including solar racking, solar carports, solar shade structures, awnings, canopies, and patio covers. In addition, pretty much anything else required for that system to be installed and function properly is also exempt. So things like if they want to put in a battery with their solar, trenching for conduit, grading for foundations, transformers, and landscaping for screening would be exempt from design review. So this definition is greatly expanded. With regard to the support structures, something like a shade structure or awning, the real primary purpose of that structure would have to be to support the solar use. We'd be looking at the primary use of that structure when we were deciding whether or not it was exempt from design review. So these permit streamlining provisions also now apply to any solar project. So serving any type of utility customer, so commercial, industrial, residential, you name it, anything pretty much now, and that was another change. So at the same time, the state legislature made very similar changes, similar changes for EV charging, so electric vehicle charging systems. Very similar to the solar streamlining provisions. And again, our SB Municipal Code 2292 already incorporates by reference State Government Code 65850.7 that addresses streamlining of EV charging stations. Again, this last year, the legislature passed AB 970, which expanded the streamlining provisions for EV charging stations, and also created strict approval timelines within which we have to issue permits for EV charging stations. So again, an electric vehicle charging station is not just the unit itself. It's all electrical elements, trenching, restriping, curb cuts, and access sidewalks, bollards, landscaping, and pretty much anything needed to install and operate that system. The stations only need ministerial approvals unless there's a specific threat to public health and safety. This government code section also specifically prohibits design review for aesthetic purposes. And just like the solar, our objective development standards in our municipal code still apply. Something unique to the EV chargers, if installing the EV charging stations reduces the number of parking spaces, the state code states that that can't count against a landowner. So if there's a required number of parking spaces associated with a business and these EV chargers would take those up, they can't be penalized for that, if that makes sense. So our approach to implementing these new regulations, as I mentioned, we don't actually need to do an ordinance amendment because we incorporate the state codes by reference. We are updating all of our procedures and application materials to state that no discretionary design review for these projects are needed. We are also working interdepartmentally to review and update our best management practices, including our solar design guidelines and incorporating some landscaping design guidelines for our EV charging projects, so we can at least recommend to people things that they could be doing to make their projects better. For municipal photovoltaic and EV charger projects, similar to those in the private sector, we are really seeing that these projects do need to be streamlined also. We are finding a lot of funding coming down from the state for these projects, and they assume very tight timelines that assume that these stations and permits are streamlined. And so because most solar EV projects are fairly standard, we think the application of best management practices will address the majority of cases. And staff and interdepartmentally has been exploring multiple options to make sure that when we're installing these in our public places that we meet the city's design goals. We've put a lot of time and money into how our city looks, and we do not want to go against that with these projects. And so the conclusion is that PV and EV projects on city property will not go to design review boards. PV and EV projects will adhere to best management practices unless there's specific cost or other project prohibitives. And then we'll be consulting with design review staff, especially when there's situations such as historic structures early, so that we can make sure that any design elements that are needed to address those situations are incorporated into our projects. So our staff team here has actually just finished presenting this issue to the Sustainability Council Committee, and then also Historic Landmarks Commission. And so we're before you today to get your comments and provide any input that you may have on this process.
Okay, thank you. Anything else to add?
Not right now. If we want to move to public comment, and then we can answer any questions you have.
Okay, we'll open public comment for this item.
Thank you, Chair Moore. If anyone participating via Zoom would like to speak on this item, please go ahead and raise your hand and I'll call on you. Doesn't look like I have any raised hands. I also don't have any speaker slips, and we did not receive any written correspondence for this item. Back to you, Chair Moore.
Okay, let's close public comment and go to questions from the board. Who would like to start? Vice Chair
Moore,
Six.
I don't recall in your first notes. There will be no mention of any guidelines in the newly upcoming objective standard, design standards. that will be completely off the table?
Board Member 6, we can recommend design measures and BMPs, but we can't require them. And so I'm not sure the format of your objective design standards, but my understanding was those are required, right?
Chair Moore, through you to Vice Chair Six. So my understanding is that the objective design standards don't have anything specific related to EV and PV projects. I think that's, this is such a specific topic, but we do have existing guidelines. And I think one of the things we could look at is to what extent something is objective or not. But we have, the work that we've been doing, this went into effect in January. And we've spent, like, there's been multiple meetings going through our ordinance, or the entire municipal code to understand what is related to design review and what's something that we could actually apply that meets, that a project can meet ministerial criteria. I think we can ask Ms. Deisty in the next part two of the today's agenda. But no, there's nothing specifically in the objective design standards related to that.
All right. We had another experience here where we were working very well with the applicant for the police station and recommended that there were several other places rather than up on the street facade to place the solar panels, and he obliged and thought it was better for the overall project. Is that something that we can play with suggesting to the applicant if he's interested in improving or, you know, finding an alternate design that doesn't inhibit the number and, you know, feasibility and expense of the system to improve his project by putting them in another more discreet place?
Board Member 6, so our municipal projects have to meet a municipal green building policy that council adopted about a year ago, and that requires our buildings to be net energy neutral. So essentially, any energy that our building is creating, it should be producing too in the form of solar or other generation. And so as long, for instance, in this case of the police station, as long as the building can meet those requirements, I'm sure that designer would be open to suggestions of how it could be designed. And that's part of what we're actually working actively right now at the staff level, specifically on that project of what is the amount that's needed to meet the green building policy versus where we need to put it to make it look better, look great aesthetically, and where is that good balancing. And so right now we're working with the architect and their sustainability consultant and between staff on that project. But I'd say you'd have to be careful in your official comments before the board on that those would really be on the building. But if you have suggestions, I'm sure that
In a suggested format.
Yeah.
Suggested.
And yeah, if I could add to that, Vice Chair Six, is that there are going to be some projects that come to you, like the police station, that are at an entirely new building, and of course they're incorporating solar or EV charging stations on site. So it makes it easier to understand what's the guidance to the architect, and then what's recommendations, what would be nice, or what might be helpful to consider for recommendations. But then there are going to be some projects that won't even come to this board or to the HLC because it might just be for that particular EV charging station or for the PV installation. So there could be two tracks, but when it's the larger projects that is helpful, you know, I think we can easily set it up in the way that you provide your comments to be recommendations, but nothing that can be mandated.
Last situation, I think it was, and I know it was, reviewed on consent, so it was really only me. and it was the Bank of America up on Upper State Street just put in 7 EV chargers. And because they, let's see, what did they do? I think, yes, you were there. They changed the landscape, so they had to put in a whole row of permeable pavers. They had some remote equipment, whether it was truly part of the EV stations, but it was kind of migrated into the rest of the parking lot. And so we spent a lot of time with them, and they were very cooperative, finding better ways to landscape and screen it. And where's that edge? You know, because it's not, you know, is this new clarity saying that we cannot require or suggest additional landscaping in other places to in the parking lot to compensate for the loss of landscape directly and near the EV stations?
Board Member Six, this is a conversation that we've had many meetings about. So one way to think about it is if you put in the EV charger and it triggers a SWIMP requirement, which would still apply, the charger project has to meet it. And if there's a tree removal, they still have to meet our tree removal ordinance or our tree ordinance. But if any measures are required to meet those ordinances, so let's say they have to put in some landscaping or permeable pavers because of SWIMP, those things don't push it into the design review boards. So because those are essentially considered required things to be able to put in the EV charging station. So that would not push it into being reviewed by your board, but they would be required, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does. Thank
And
you.
Vice Chair Six, if I could just add to that. So again, that's one of the many projects that we've been working on is combing through the municipal code to understand what are the things that we can apply, because if we can't apply something just because of design or some kind of aesthetic reasoning for the purpose of it, then that's, you know, it doesn't meet the statute. So we need to, but there are certain things that are like having a landscape buffer between the side, or, you know, between parked cars and a neighboring parcel, so that you don't have a car go into, run into an adjacent parcel, or looking at certain areas of the code where certain elements are protected, like the tree. So it's unfortunately, I mean, unfortunately, there are a number of things that are in our municipal code that are just to achieve an aesthetic. And so some of those we are not able to apply on their own. But we still have some ministerial criteria for people to meet. It's just not as expansive as we might have wanted necessarily from a design standpoint.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
We just have a little bit over time, so I know everyone is full of questions,
Thank you.
I'm sure. So if everyone maybe just limit themselves to one burning question that they have, I think that'd be helpful. Mr. Whalen, can you kick us
Well,
off?
I think Mr. Six put out the fire of my burning question. Thank you.
Excellent. Mr. Olson.
I could give my question to Mr. Six, too, if he'd like.
Okay, Mr. Noon.
I don't have any questions.
Okay, Mr. Black.
And maybe Mr. Six already asked this question. So am I to understand then, if you had let's say, as part of a new development project, a new parking lot came in and EV charging stations were being proposed as part of the parking lot. So would the parking lot still be subject to parking lot design guidelines? Screening, amount of landscaping, a tree every 8 spaces, that kind of thing, if in fact there are half a dozen charging stations as part of this parking lot, so to speak?
Board member, I believe that the rest of the parking lot would be setback, wouldn't it?
Honorable Chair, members of the.
Pardon my interruption. Mr. Henry, do you mind speaking into the mic?
No, I don't. That's in this thing here? Yes. Okay. Oh, I'm Dan Hinchke, Assistant City Attorney. I've been working on this project. The answer, in my opinion, is you would be able to review the parking lot according to the standards that you would normally review the parking lot for.
Okay.
But you would not be able to consider aesthetic considerations, for example, just because of the EV charging stations. If there was a screening requirement for the parking lot generally, for example, around the border, and that would be something that you would normally apply, you could normally apply it. But if you were simply putting the screening there to screen the EV charging stations because you don't like the way that the EV charging stations look, or they're too high or whatever, you can't, that would be an improper reason to include that kind of a landscape. And so you have to differentiate between the reason why you're doing it. And a way to think about it is you're just invisible to the EV charging station. You consider the rest of the structures themselves. And if they are putting in EV charging stations, as Melissa indicated, you cannot deduct from the parking requirements. If they install an EV charging station and it takes up a larger space, they don't get penalized because of that.
Well, I think part of that question goes to, what if they say, well, we can't fit all of the required elements, like a tree for every, we have certain standards for parking lots, like there's a tree for every 8 spaces, there's, all sorts of things. If they say, well, because of the requirements of the charging stations, it's taking up as much room as it does, we can't possibly fit all of those elements.
Honorable Chair, members of the commission, I really hate answering abstract questions. I would love to be able to look at it at a set of plans and know the answer to that question.
Okay.
But based upon the hypothetical that you gave me, my answer to that would be, you may be able to require the same amount of trees, but you would have to reduce the number of otherwise required parking spaces so that you could accommodate the EV charging stations on the site. The key to the law is that aesthetic design criteria cannot be used in the evaluation of the EV charging stations or any other solar installation. It's basically any other solar installation. And so if you have a tree requirement that applies to the property, you could apply the tree requirement that would apply to the property as a whole. You then go to the next level, which is the parking spaces. They want to put in EV charging stations. You might lose some of the required parking, but that's specifically accounted for in the legislation. So that's the best I can do on a hypothetical.
Okay, thanks. Ms. Anderson?
No question.
Okay. Vice Chair Six, follow-up question.
Yes, is there, I think one of the issues with the parking structure image that we have was that a lot of my buddies were surprised that the panels were so high. Is there any internal mechanism in your rules that limit the height of the solar panels above, parking and so forth, that says they can't extraordinarily hover high? Is there any limits that these things need to be internal to your rules, that these things need to be hovered down as close as they can to the earth?
Would you like me to handle that, or would you like to
Yes,
handle it?
please, Mr. Henschke.
Okay, thank you. Honorable Chair, members of the commission. The answer depends on whether it's a public project or a private project. We're going to talk about private projects here. Ms. Ettrick already addressed the public project issue. With regard to the private projects, if you have a standard that applies to the structure generally, that says it cannot exceed a certain height. For example, like a carport can't be higher than whatever it is. Then the solar structure would have to meet that objective standard. That's an objective standard, it's not a design standard, you just have to meet it, just like a setback. If it says you can't put this in the setback, you can't put it in the setback. That's a standard. And, but is there, because you don't like the way it looks, if a carport is allowed in that particular area, could staff require it to be lowered because you don't like the way it looks? No. That would be trying to apply an aesthetic design criteria to a structure that is improper. And the important thing here is that the state law is preemptive. And so, you know, yes, we're a charter city. Yes, we have some independence unless the state says we don't. And in this instance, the state says we don't.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Well, I think that wraps it up. Those are sort of questions and / comments. So,
Maybe I've come up with a question.
okay.
This example that's on the board, so for a specific, those are panels that we might normally have asked them to lower them so that they weren't so readily seen from the street. Could that be could we make that a requirement?
Or relocate them.
Well, or relocate them, yes.
And Mr. Chair, through you to Board Member Olson, so that particular project is right across from the courthouse. And so what was really interesting about that project, before this law went into effect on January 1st of this year, that was subject to design review because it was actually a carport with solar panels on top. But on January 1, when the definition expanded to include elements like carports, that project is no longer triggers design review. It's simply a ministerial project. So this wouldn't even have a chance to, that project today would not have a chance, well, okay, let's pretend if it's a private project. Let's pretend that's private. It would not have a chance to come before this board. So they would be able to submit directly for their building permit, and that's what we would review, just a building permit.
And that was because it wasn't a new project, but if this had been a new project, then it would have been under the purview, our purview?
Not to my knowledge. Nothing about that project would have triggered design review. And Melissa, I don't know if you want to say
Yeah,
more.
Board Member Olson, do you mean if it was a new building?
Yes.
Oh, yes, the building itself would be subject to design review. Again, if the solar panels met the overall height requirements, the objective height requirements, you would not be able to comment on the aesthetics of their placement.
Thank you.
But in terms of having the option, you know, you could, if the whole project is going, the entire building, the structure, all solar panels, they show that on the plans, and you could make recommendations, but nothing could be mandated by this board.
Okay. Thank you very much. We'll
Thank
move on
you.
to item number 2.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. And this is also a discussion item. This is Objective Design and Development Standards Status Update. Okay, welcome back.
Thank you. Good afternoon, members of the board. Thank you for having me. So today I'm just going to give a brief overview of our admin draft Objective Design Standards project. And I'll just start on my presentation here. So we're going to start with a little video that we created for the public to sort of give an overview of what this project is all about. And then I'll come back and give you a very brief sort of chapter by chapter of what's in the Objective Design and Development Standards and talk about the review schedule. So take it away for the video.
design standards may be one of the most important ways the city can still influence the design of new housing development in our community. The goals of this project are to develop objective design standards for multi-unit and mixed-use projects and provide a more predictable and efficient review process that results in a quality design consistent with community expectations. Why are we doing this? The state of California and Santa Barbara have a critical shortage of affordable housing. In Santa Barbara, 50% of renters are overpaying for housing. 70% want to buy a house but can't afford it. To address the housing crisis, the city needs to provide for over 8,000 new units over the next 8 years. Recent state laws aimed at promoting housing prohibit local agencies from disapproving an eligible housing project if the project is consistent with objective standards. Objective means there is no personal judgment involved. In other words, no gray area for interpretation. Standards must be measurable and verifiable. The city's multiple existing design guidelines, which require personal judgment and interpretation, were developed to ensure high design standards are maintained in new developments. The shift from subjective to objective design standards will ensure that requirements for new housing projects are clear, understandable, and lead to predictable, high-quality results. So what's the difference between a guideline and a standard? Instead of recommendations, objective standards are enforceable requirements. Guidelines that are open to interpretation must be made measurable and verifiable. Words like should or may are replaced with words like shall, must, and required to. Here's an example. Instead of buildings oriented to the street are preferred, the new standard requires each building to include at least one private frontage type, like a porch or stoop, along the street or adjacent civic space. The new objective standards will include a map of the project area, form-based standards for new buildings, and a palette of specific architectural styles to choose from. The program will apply to areas of the city that currently allow 2 or more residential units, not including accessory dwelling units and mixed use. Only certain housing projects will be eligible: multi-unit, mixed use, and projects containing a minimum percentage of affordable housing. Other developments are not eligible, such as single-unit homes, accessory dwelling units, non-residential, mobile home parks, and projects that propose an alternative design. The new standards will be a voluntary opt-in program for applicants seeking streamlined review. Applicants may propose an alternative design using the city's current design review process. Community feedback is invited to discuss how these standards can contribute to a range of compatible, appropriate housing options. Sign up online to stay informed of meeting dates and see what we're working on. Review the draft standards and provide input, and participate in upcoming public hearings. Here's a brief timeline for this project. Final standards are expected to be presented for adoption in the summer of 2023. Sign up online to stay informed at santabarbaraca.gov/SBDS. For additional questions, please email staff at sbds@santabarbaraca.gov. Thank you.
Okay, so I'll go now into the presentation. And this presentation was provided to our work group members about 2 weeks ago, so this is an abbreviated version that the consultant gave, Opticos Design. So again, why are we doing this? It's to develop objective design standards for multi-unit and mixed-use projects. Hopefully, this would result in more housing production because it would be a predictable and efficient process that results in quality design, though in line with our community's expectations. So the tasks that have been completed so far by our consultant is what the administrative draft of the objective design standards. We decided to release the same draft that staff is reviewing, the public's reviewing, the work group's reviewing, and also your board just to get early input at this stage of the document. So we have those up and ready to be reviewed, and a map that shows where they would apply. And now I'm just going to sort of walk through what's in the document itself. So it's Title 25. It would be a new title of the municipal code, and it starts with a guide for how to use the title if you were proposing a project. So it goes through how you determine your zoning envelope, how you connect your project's ground floor to the adjacent streetscape, designing your building, applying signage if that's something you need for your project, and then going through the approval process. Did I skip a, no, that was it, sorry. The next chapter talks about what Opticus is calling these zones or neighborhood zones and standards, and there's a palette of 5 of them that fit our city, and they range from sort of lower intensity house scale buildings in the less urban parts of the city. Those are called neighborhood small, neighborhood medium. Then it sort of ramps up to bigger building types for Main Street medium and neighborhood large, kind of ending at higher intensity block scale buildings, and they call that Main Street large. Chapter 3 then goes into, for each of those types I just mentioned or zones, it then goes into details of what's expected in that zone. So it gives you a menu of building types, lot sizes, setbacks, height, parking standards, things like that for each zone that's explained in the document. Another interesting part of Chapter 3 that I think your board in particular, I'd love your input on, is what they call additional height and massing requirements. And this is where we tried to take some things that are fairly subjective to do with neighborhood compatibility and make it objective, and that's a really difficult task. So at least in this initial draft, what they looked at were, what if you're transitioning from an R2 neighborhood to a commercial neighborhood, or something where it's, you know, more smaller scale to a bigger scale? What do you do in those cases? How do you transition if your new building is right next to a historic landmark or structure of merit? What do you do if your new building is next to a building that maybe could have been built taller but wasn't, so the existing building doesn't meet the full zoning envelope? So these are a set of standards that are attempting to sort of get to that neighborhood compatibility standard that everyone likes. Then Chapter 5 is a set of site design standards that are sort of general for all types of things. So in here they looked at screening, landscape and lighting, parking and loading, slope parcels, public frontages, privacy, and rooftop decks. And just to go back a little to the presentation you just had about the solar PV equipment, I haven't read the whole document in great detail, but it is mentioned in screening, but it basically says that they're exempt from screening. So that's the only mention that I know of about that equipment in this document so far. Chapter 6 is where the standards are coordinated to building size. So again, it talks a little bit about house scale buildings and block scale buildings, and then goes into sort of the shape of the building based on the type of building it is and lot size. And then there's another sort of unique concept in here where standards for multiple buildings on large lots. So there are cases where the lot is pretty large and you can divide it into what's called design sites. So those are not actual subdivisions, but they're sort of an imaginary line on your property where you would build your new buildings per design site. And that's one way to break up the mass of a building. So you have maybe 2 or 3 buildings of various heights and shapes rather than one big mass. Chapter 6 also includes building type standards. So it goes into, I think we have maybe 11 or 12 building types. It ranges from duplexes to multiplexes to townhouses to Main Street buildings. And then it goes into details about the form of those kind of buildings. and where you put your parking and things like that. Chapter 7 covers all the frontage types. So this was really important concept that Opticos promotes, where every building does have a pedestrian-facing frontage of one type or another. So there's porches, dooryards, stoops, shop fronts if you're a mixed-use building, you know, or maybe an arcade or a gallery. So it goes into all the details for those various pedestrian-facing frontages. And then Chapter 8 is where we get into architectural design. So per the contract we had with Opticos, we had basically enough funding for, they split it into 3 style groups, and then under each style group, there's 2 different subgroups. So we have a Mediterranean style group, a contemporary style group, and a craftsman style group. And at least for this initial draft, we said that within El Pueblo Viejo, only the Mediterranean style group would be allowed per our city charter and municipal code. But anywhere else where these apply, you could apply all style groups. I think this is something that would be interesting once you've had time to review this. I'd love to hear more from the work group and from your board if that's appropriate, or are there other areas of the city where maybe you would want to limit styles. And then it delves into, once you get into that chapter, what are the characteristics of each of these styles and their subgroups. So there's photos, and it talks about window size and doors and materials and roofs and all the things that make up an architectural style. Here's another page from that chapter. So this is an example of the contemporary style. There's some photos. And then as you get into the chapter, it goes into more details. So this is also where I'd love to get some of your expertise. Chapter 9 signage was sort of I want to call it almost a freebie. This is something that Opticos sort of offered to prepare for us. They've already done sign standards. It's not something we had planned to look at with this project, but we told them to go ahead and include them. And this chapter will likely be reviewed separately. There's another process to update the sign ordinance, and I think that would go hand in hand with these standards. We may end up pulling this chapter out of this particular document, but we do have it if you're interested in seeing what it has. And then Chapter 10 is all about civic spaces, which are defined as plazas, pocket parks, paseos, community gardens, and playgrounds, and where these would be required, and then if they're required, there's some standards for those things. Almost there. So Chapter 11 goes into if you still want to use design standards, but you need some exceptions for various reasons, there's a little bit of wiggle room there where you could still say you're applying under these design standards, but you need a few exceptions without. But if you did need a modification or a variance or something like that, you would not be using these standards. You'd be using the regular design review process. And finally, Chapter 12 is definitions and then measurement methods. So that sort of summarizes what's in this document. One more slide, just talk about our schedule. So we just released the draft, and we had a work group meeting similar. They had a similar presentation to this one. There's a lot to look at. It's about 300 pages, so we're giving plenty of time for the public and everyone else to have a look at this. We asked the public to submit their comments by December 16th. We will be working with our work group and have a couple more meetings to go into detail on this, and I expect they would be updating you on how that's going. And then what we need to do is package up all the input we're getting and give it back to our consultant, who would then prepare the next phase of the draft. We do expect to come back to your board probably in January 2023 and to get your formal input on this document. So we're not expecting any input today. It's just letting you know it's available. You can look at it, talk to your work group members to get updates, and we'll be coming back to you for a more formal presentation. And that ends my presentation.
Excellent, thank you. So unless anyone has any real questions, I mean, do we need public comment? We do,
yeah,
okay. let's open public comment for this item.
Thank you, Chair Moore. If anyone participating via Zoom would like to go ahead and speak on this item, please go ahead and raise your hand and I'll call on you. Doesn't look like I have any raised hands, and we also didn't receive any written correspondence for this. Thank you, back to you.
Okay, let's close public comment. Vice Chair Six.
Chair Moore, I'm on the work committee, and I'm really excited about this document. That when you look at it as an overview and the whole thing, 300 pages, it does look overwhelming, but it's looking very well structured and beautifully illustrated and organized, such that when a user comes and has specific questions or specific building type and so forth, I think it's going to be very efficient and a beautiful document to use. Thanks.
Great, and I would encourage everybody to take a look and participate in the input process.
Can you just let us know where we can find this document?
Certainly, Commissioner Anderson. We have a website, Santa Barbara Design Standards. So if you go to the city's main webpage and just type in SBDS, actually, there it is. And if you scroll down a little bit, there's the 2 green buttons. So the admin draft is there. The map I talked about is there. And we hope to have up probably this week another map that would be a web-based map. So the zone maps is just a PDF, and it's really hard to read. But when we have the web-based map up, you should be able to zoom in and click on a particular parcel and see what sort of standards apply to that parcel. So look for that later.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Chair Moore?
Yes.
A question for Ms. Dice. I got the idea that this is optional. If a developer wanted to do multi-housing in a very creative way, that they could just put the ODS aside and come to the board. Is that correct?
Yes, Commissioner Whalen, that is correct. We have designed this as an opt-in program. So we wanted to have that option for creativity or different architectural styles. Will still be allowed.
And then following up on that, will projects that do go to the ODS, will they not come to the board, or will they make an appearance for our weighing in to some degree, or is it completely ministerial by staff?
So Commissioners, we are still working on the process for how this will work because it's all very new, but we do understand because of the city charter, projects would still come to you. But exactly how your review would go and what the purview is, we're still working out the details.
Okay. Thank you. All right, we can move on to item 3, please. Hello, everyone. Okay, so this is 831 Cliff Drive, and this is a proposal to construct a new driveway approach, security lift arm gates, and entry kiosk. Proposal includes restriping a parking lot, small interior planter fence, and landscape improvements. Project design approval and final approval is requested. The project requires compliance with the project compatibility guidelines and was last here on consent, January 10th of this year. Do we have our minutes?
Okay, Mr. Chair, yes,
Yeah.
the minutes for this project are on the screen.
Okay. Okay, that's the sum total of the minutes. Is the, okay, so you're returning to the full board for final approval, I see. Okay, that's how you're here. Okay. Not a lot to work with there. But I trust you'll do a good job of walking us through this. Yes. If you could introduce yourselves.
Hello, I'm Lonnie Roy. I'm the agent for the owner of the property.
I'm Sam Maphis, the landscape architect for the property.
Okie doke. Yeah, and just a little background. I mean, the reason we're coming back here is the consent board said due to the history of the property that it was recommended to come back to the full board, so we are here. So we are proposing to remodel the Cliff Drive entry of the property. It's located at the southwest corner of Cliff Drive and Loma Alta in between City College campus. So it is this entry right here off of Cliff Drive. So existing conditions is right here. So it's just a single drive aisle down with a parking lot if you're coming into the driveway to your right. And there are slide vehicular gates that are at the entry there. And the reason we are proposing to remodel it is right now, functionally, there are issues with it in terms of there's a lot of delivery services for the residents of the property. And if the gate is closed, it creates an issue with people turning around and that entry can get blocked. So it creates a safety hazard as well. So we are proposing to remodel the entry to include a turning circle at the entry, and we squeezed the parking stalls in the left parking area down, working with staff, so it doesn't expand out, but it just condenses that to accommodate the traffic circle. The traffic circle, what is different than what was proposed on PDA is it's now enhanced with permeable pavers with a double header course and herringbone field. There are 2 drop-off spaces added at the traffic circle, and instead of slide vehicular gates, we are proposing a guarded kiosk with lift arm gates. And along the frontage of the parking, we are proposing a low vine fence as required by code to screen the parking. We've also added interior planter islands to the parking area. There is an existing chain link fence that needs to be kind of reconfigured in this corner over here slightly. And moving on. So the entry kiosk is proposed to have the front end of a Volkswagen microbus mounted to the front of it, and that would be what you would see coming into it. The remainder of the structure is natural galvanized aluminum or natural galvanized steel or raw aluminum color, and it would have a low slope roof with 2 surfboards mounted to the top of it. There's some construction detailing. I'll let Sam take over on the landscape.
Thanks, you, Lonnie. So in the spirit of the Fun Beach City name for the complex, we're going to be applying some new large Phoenix dactylifera palms. So the main palms kind of flank the entry, drive, ingress, egress. We also flank the into the parking lot on either side where the triangle planters have a large area, and in the planter islands. So at the end, there's another one, but those are the main tree features. And then along Cliff Drive, we have jacarandas proposed, 4 of them, and then 1 at the end. As Lonnie said, the fence that's there that's required is 3'6" high, and in front of that, we will have the bougainvillea, Ooh La La, which is a bright colored bougainvillea against that fence to kind of screen and pile up so that we do baffle and filter the cars. In front of that, we have a mix of agave, Phrycrea variegata, and Lomandra platinum beauty. So there's a mix of 3 shrubs as well as another agave attenuata that mixes along the frontage, as well as the low planting against the sidewalk. To keep it low maintenance is Myoporum pink, the parvifolia pink, so it's very low, flat, green ground cover, so it'll appear very clean and be low maintenance. And of course, these are all drought tolerant. very low water needing plants and low maintenance. In the center of the circle, we have a Phrycrea variegata, which will be quite beautiful foliage-wise. And then we have the soap aloe. So we've got some flowering things, some changing interest. We've got plenty of screening in layers in front of the fence. And again, the main canopy tree is the large Dactylifera date palm, which grows much, much better long-term than the Canariensis. As you all know, that's having a tough time with some disease, so we're not opting for any of that. The Canariensis palm, the classic California palm, has got a disease that's affecting it, so you're not seeing it grown much in the nurseries anymore. We do have a lot of Kintia palms and queen palm and king palms on the property, so we really are kind of supplementing that theme and creating consistency throughout the property with this entry. There's another court further east that has the Dactyliferas lined up in rows and creates a real nice outdoor courtyard. So we're repeating those trees on this side of the property to kind of balance things out. I think that takes care of most of my presentation.
Okay, anything else to add?
Nope.
Okay, thanks. Let's open public comment, if we could.
Thank you, Chair Moore. Let's see, I don't have anyone participating via Zoom, and I don't have any speaker slips, and we did not receive any written correspondence for this item. Back to you.
Okay, we'll close public comment and go to questions. Mr. Whalen, you want to start?
Sure, thank you, Chair Moore. I may have missed it, Mr. Roy, but is there any change in the number of parking spaces?
No, there's no change to the number of
No
parking
change in
spaces.
the spaces. And I could ask you what year the VW bus is, but is it a real VW bus?
That is our intention. We have not purchased it yet, but that is our intention.
All right, thank you. Those are my only questions.
Okay, Mr. Olson?
Yes, is there a site plan that shows neighborhood site?
No, we submitted photos in a separate PDF with the initial submittal that was presented during the PDA hearing.
Are those photos available?
Looks
Mr.
like
Chair,
they're,
through you to Board Member Olson, let me see if I can pull those up. Hang on.
Thank you.
Like adjacent neighborhood conditions across the
Yes.
street.
Yes.
It's pinched between the two entrances of City College, basically.
is there anything on the January PDF that's just to the right on your,
No, we submit
Screen.
our photos
Okay.
in a separate booklet. Yeah,
okay,
across the street, there isn't any houses fronting it. It's a slope that has a tiered retaining wall system. So it's just landscape directly across
well,
the
let's
project.
move on with any other questions. We'll circle back to that. Anything else?
No other questions
Mr.
from me?
Noon?
Yes, thank you. If I remember right, we saw this in a different version of, not this, but work on the property, and it involved, we had quite a bit of back and forth on tree selection. I remember Black, maybe you would remember, but I remember we were pretty specific about the trees that lined Cliff. Is this in keeping with?
Well, I do recall we had some concerns and some neighborhood concerns with the Monterey cypress. If you recall, we did replant many new Monterey cypress per the purview of the guideline and purview of the neighbors. There were, I can't remember what trees were substituted, but we listened, and obviously we acquiesced to the right way to plant the rest of the property. But this end of the property, there wasn't any criteria that I knew of that needed to be followed.
Okay.
We replanted the numbers that we needed to.
Okay, I couldn't remember if this was outside of that bigger site that we looked at, but.
Yeah, so touching back on that, so the property, the original approved landscape plans required, I think it was 23 Monterey cypress trees. We had proposed an alternative tree to replace those, and that was not approved. So what we came back with was planting the approved 23 Monterey cypress trees just in some different locations in the approved plans. And there are about 3 of them, but they're just off to the side here. So there are some on the periphery of
okay.
this, but, so those would all be remaining.
Thank you.
Mr. Black,
So in that vein,
go ahead and turn your microphone.
so remind me, so when we did give you that approval for everything sort of east, I guess, of what we're seeing here, then what, you weren't showing us anything in this area at the time? I'm trying to remember.
There was some as-built landscape that was approved underneath there, but none of the Monterey cypress trees
Right.
were in this location.
Okay, so there was nothing new and proposed in this area at that time then?
Correct.
The original approved plan, I think, had all the Monterey cypress on the main campus, which
I
is to
remember.
the east of that,
Okay.
Yes.
to kind of walk and screen the buildings
So
mostly.
a couple questions, Sam. So could you just remind me what size trees you're anticipating using here?
Yeah, I think,
The palms and?
yeah, we
the-
didn't
and
call
the
that
trees?
out, but I think they're gonna be 12 to 14-foot round trunk, so they'll be
This is on the,
on the
Phoenixes?
Dactylophorus. Mhm.
okay. You're gonna want it showed on the plan though, yeah?
Yeah, I made a note on my plan, because I
Okay.
noticed when we submitted, we did not put the
And
height
then-
of that, for
and then that-
clearance of trucks and.
Okay. And then that 3/6 fence, is it wire and wood? And could you sort of explain why you're using wire? It doesn't really provide you any screening initially for a while. I know you got that ooh-la-la happening eventually, but
It's going to happen quite quickly, I think, on that, but
what was the reason you used the wire?
can
Just
you
out of curiosity.
expand on
There
that?
are elevator shafts on the apartment buildings that have vine wire on them, so it was to kind of tie into some of the detailing that's on the architecture already.
Yeah, even though it's gonna disappear, of course, but.
That was the intent, I think, the screening of it, and so it's a good substructure for any kind of vine to climb on. It's very strong, and I didn't realize it had an architectural continuity to some of the buildings as well, that grid.
Okay, those are my questions, thank you.
Vice Chair Six?
Well, I know that it's here for full board because of the sensitivity about the cypress trees. And the history was that the existing significant grove of cypress trees were removed without approval. And there was a lot of struggles to get subsequent replacement of them. My question to staff, is there any way we can, and we saw in the approval of the larger project, we saw photographs of some struggling cypress trees. Staff, is there any way that we can tie inspection or review of the balance of the project subject, in specific reference to those cypress trees, to see if they're been neglected, or has there been any monitoring attempt on those? Because it was quite a concern when we last saw this project.
Mr. Chair, through you to Vice Chair Six, from what I understand, there's ongoing monitoring, and there's a whole, there was a legal case tied to this, and enforcement and action taken by the city and agreements with the property owner, and maybe the applicant can say a little bit more about that, but I think there's considerable oversight, and I think
Not needed here.
perhaps not. And I also just want to say I do have the photos that I can share if the applicant wishes to share those with the board.
Yeah, and then I'll just quickly note, yeah, so the property goes under quarterly monitoring report for the restoration work that was done on the slope. And within that, the Monterey cypress trees are included in all the quarterly reports. And we go over that with city staff in video conferencing for each of those quarterly reports.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, if you could just briefly walk us through your photo exhibit here.
And to the applicant, I can give you the mouse.
So that's the overview. The cross-hatched area on the west end is, of course, this project's focus. And then behind it, towards the ocean, is a large ESH eucalyptus kind of backdrop of the property has a lot of large trees looking to the south. From that, from that property that is terraced above cliff. So you may take it from there.
And so just quickly, so these areas kind of down here, that's part of the restoration area. That's the main focus of those quarterly and annual reports that was just mentioned. And the Monterey cypress trees are dispersed along these areas of the project. So this is a photo within the entry, looking at the main interior gate. So that's kind of would be right here. Then this is looking at the outbound gate. So you can see they're both slide vehicular gates. Further out. This is the current entry. So one thing that's kind of being done with the grading, you can kind of see right now when you come up the driveway approach, there's a little bit of a bump up before you change to going down in elevation. So that's going to be transition. So you kind of transition to going straight and then down. So there's a little bit less of extreme elevation change. And then here's a further out view. So I'll just note, as you can see, there's a current hedge that's screening the parking. That hedge is not meet current code, it's too high, and that's part of the reason that we're proposing the vine fence.
Okay, thank you. Questions, Ms. Anderson?
Sure. Is there any additional backflow for irrigation required in this area?
Backflow device irrigation.
For irrigation.
We'll be using the existing irrigation system that's protected
Okay.
with a backflow condition currently.
And it's screened.
It will be, for sure. I can't be sure exactly where it is
You might want to mark that on your plan, just for the record.
to be screened.
Yep.
Good point.
Okay,
Anything
I'll
else?
have his comments.
Okay. I guess the question is, for me, so since you've reminded us about kind of the overall palette that's stretching along Cliff Drive anyway, does that sort of stop at this driveway entrance and you have a new landscape palette to the west of the entrance?
There's a lot of Kintia palms throughout that wrap the corner of this kind of west end. And then as you look at that drawing, you see the amount of right-of-way that's on the north side of the property. And that is mostly ice planted carpet rhodus and a large hill. So you really can't see much of the building landscape except for the palms and the cypress. But our palette is integral to this new plan to create some excitement. The palms, as I said, are integral to the property, and there are other Phoenix dactyliferas, the date palms, on the other side of the west side of the property, east side, excuse me. So now we're pulling those into this side to kind of counterbalance and bring those in. The jacarandas are not unique, but they are a show on this side more than another expression. And we have, I think, one on the other side, but we didn't feel like we needed a Monterey cypress. That wasn't part of, something that we felt we had to put into this because of the overall kind of clean look that we're making this entrance look as a continuity to much of the palms and lushness that the rest of the project has. So I don't know if that helps it put it in context, but we do feel like it fits in.
Mm-hmm. And then the planting on your parking lot fingers, are all three palms?
3 palms and then the jacaranda at the end, yes.
Okay. You feel that's an
These are-
appropriate solution for shading that hardscape?
Yeah, these are big palms. They have quite a spread on them.
How tall are these going to get?
30, 35.
You feel that's the
David?
Is that the?
In ideal conditions in the desert, they may get taller,
Yeah, in 30 or 35 years, maybe.
a long time, yeah.
Is that roughly the canopy graphically shown, or you?
I don't think they're as wide as the Canariensis, so I think they're appropriate, probably about 15 to 20 feet versus 30 feet for a cousin of this.
Okay. Well, those are my questions. So, any other follow-up questions?
Just a quick one. So
Yeah.
are you concerned?
I'm sorry, Mr. Black, do you mind speaking into the mic?
Sorry. Are you at all concerned about the size of the canopy of the jacarandas interfering with your palms at all? Are you able to clear the palms? The one thing I don't like is canopies. I mean, palms.
mixing.
Yeah, mixing.
I think that these will be above the jacarandas for a long time, and then I think you'll see them from the inside, but
Talking about
they
the
could-
palms.
Yeah, could compete eventually.
Does that concern you at all?
I don't think so, because of the theme that we have. The interior feeling of those palms should express themselves fine.
And I'm sorry, you didn't answer my question about the size of the jacarandas that you, as they go in the ground. Are they, what, 24s, 30s?
24s,
24s?
yeah.
Okay, it's going to be a while then. Okay, I'm done, thanks.
Okay. Anything else before we go to comments? Go ahead.
Sure. It's kind of a transition from a question to a comment. Mr. Mathis, did I hear you correctly saying a Fucrea was going to go in the center of the roundabout? My experience is they can be quite large. Do you have any concerns that that'll interfere with sight lines at all? They can become, the ones I know, and you can
They can
convince me otherwise, would quite outgrow the size of that.
Well, I
over-
think the outside of that canopy, if you will, of Fucrea will be over the top of the soap aloes. But I don't think it'll get much bigger than what we're showing it. And that's a big circle with a
Yeah,
lot of
and-
width.
And it's not a traffic
drive.
circle per se, so.
I think there's plenty of sight lines. You can see we have kind of a crosshatch triangle that's at the front where someone would be actually looking at it, at approaching cars. So we're looking for safety there, and I think the width, what's the width of the full cul-de-sac circle? I think it's at least.
The other comment
60,
I
70.
have
Big.
germane to the traffic circle is the location of the transformer. It looks like it could be really in peril. It's rather close to a curb, and I wondered about the necessity of having the drop-offs there, or perhaps taking some measures to protect that.
Yeah, I think we're definitely open to installing bollards to protect it. Obviously, yeah, we feel having the drop-off is necessary because of the amount of mostly food delivery services for residents that take place, that if those weren't provided, then they would be taking resident parking who parks in that parking lot, or just blocking the entry altogether.
Okay. So comments. Mr. Olson, do you have any comments?
It's back to the pictures. I'd hope to see a picture of the building that's shown here on the upper part of that. Do we have a picture of how the elevation of that building looks like?
Yeah, there you get a little bit of the side. That's as much as we've captured in these photos.
If you go back one, there's perhaps a little bit more of an angle.
Okay.
Do you have any comments?
No, I don't.
Okay, Mr. Noon.
Thank you. So, it's a fun little project, very interesting. The only comment that I would make is because of the direction and the back and forth that we had in the plant selection, it sounded like from Chair Moore's question that maybe there was a change in the palette at that entrance. My comment would be, I would like to see, I guess, and I would concede my comment to the rest of the board, but for now, I would like to see maybe how this ties in with the rest of the project, with the rest of the selection of the planting that we were given, in particular along Cliff Drive. Not as concerned about the plants on the interior, but I know along that bluff, I guess I'd like to see if the rest of the board feels that's important as well, then I'd like to see how those two work together.
Okay. Anything else? Mr. Black?
I'm sort of on the fence on it, but yeah, it is, my observation is that it is a bit of a departure from the rest of the site, plant palette-wise, but I mean, there are the palms, and you do have a lot of palms, but
That's the main theme throughout is the palms.
yeah. But you only have like 4 jacarandas, and I think the rest of the palette's probably fine. Bougainvillea probably do the job eventually with screening. So I think it's acceptable.
Okay. Vice Chair Six?
Yeah, I'm going to cheat and ask a question. The way it's configured, are you going to have some arrows or signage that get people to not take a shortcut, going the clockwise way instead of the counterclockwise?
Not sure that's a shortcut.
Sure, we could ruin our pavers and paint them. No, yeah, we could definitely add some striping to direct people. Yeah, the reason it kind of became off-centered there is there's an existing storm drain inlet
Sure, I
along the
don't.
frontage.
Yeah, I don't need to change the configuration. I think you just need
Yeah,
a minor, maybe it's a stand-up sign in the front of the center planter that says this way or something.
Arrow, possibly.
just
yeah.
Was just
Yeah.
driving in Ireland, so I hope there's no,
Besides
I
doing,
hope there's no European drivers.
One of the reasons we didn't put anything larger in that center island, which I had wanted to and proposed that initially, is because there's sewer and a water line right underneath there, so.
Okay.
As far as a root system or anything else, I think there's a lot of clear view across that circle, so.
Okay. Any other comments?
So and no comments, I think it's acceptable, except for the addition of an arrow.
Ms. Anderson?
Sure. I think the most frustrating part is that we see this site in piecemealing and projects, and so I would recommend maybe the next time you guys come back with another project on the site that we see an entire parcel and identify what has been approved and what is happening. Otherwise, I think this is an improvement to the site. I think for safety reasons, it's definitely an improvement. And regarding the signage, maybe consider doing something with the pavers, the double side pavers or whatever. Yeah, otherwise, I mean, again, with the questions about the landscape, it would be easier for us to just say, great, if we knew and could compare without us having to go dig back through the files over the last couple of years. So that would be my comment.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I agree. I think it's hard to take these little snippets of the site on so individually, and I think I'm not totally sold on your concept of having a kind of a different landscape palette than what's elsewhere on the street frontage. I know it's similar, but it's different. I'm also not totally on board with the selection of trees and the parking lot fingers. I think those are opportunities to actually get shade on hardscape, and I think that's what they're meant for. So I would prefer, personally, I would trade palms along the street frontage for a canopy tree in the fingers, you know. That would be a better solution, I think. If your overall theme is palm-centric, that would be my recommendation and preference. But everything else, I think, is great. I think the layout works. I think the concept is good. I think it's going to help the neighborhood, the residents, and the people that are providing the services. So, but it sounds like I'm in the minority. So I'll leave it to somebody else to make a motion.
I don't know that I have a motion, I just wanted to maybe add to the theme that we've been talking about with this selection. I do specifically remember, I think I remember, that we tried giving direction on these palms that maybe they wouldn't line again Cliff Drive. I don't know if any of the other board members remember that, but I think we agreed that those were appropriate on site, just more interior, and that there was a different tree should be along the frontage.
That was one of the reasons why I think we held them in and just expressed them right at the entrance, interior ingress and egress. So we wanted more of a canopy along Cliff so that you had more of a disguise to the buildings and a little more of a buffer to the buildings as you're looking at the scale of that west end of the building.
Okay. Mr. Olson, do you have something to say?
Yes. I think we've all were amused and are still amused about the Volkswagen bus. But I think it does hold some potential for, let's say, not turning out like we kind of imagine it would. And so there isn't much definition of really what it's going to be about, how it's going to be painted, how it's going to be finished, how it's going to be maintained. And I think it's a big, important element, and in this case, an architectural element. So I guess we're going to have a motion that this be accepted as is. But I would like to see further definition of that.
Okay. Well, you could take a crack at a motion and include that.
Definitely.
If you'd like.
Sure. I make a motion that we approve the project as presented for design approval with the following conditions.
So, sorry, just to be clear, so you're making a motion for project design approval or for final approval?
I was trying to see if I could separate the two.
Okay. So so project design approval with the following comments?
Yes.
Great.
Yes. My first comment is that the board would like to see further definition and specifications and conditions about the Volkswagen bus entry. And I'm then open for any other conditions that other board members might add to this, if there are any.
Okay, is there a seconder for the start of this motion?
Second.
Okay. Any discussion? Any additions to this motion?
Well, we have several members that want to see the total project, but if we give it, let's see here. If we give it project design approval, can we have, I hear several things. I hear that we want to see the balance of the project and the locations and the plant materials on the other side of on the balance of the project, and perhaps a suggestion to switch out some of the non-shade palm trees in the internal parking lot, which I support. So if it's project design approval, I think we could include all those things. Do you not think we could?
It's up to the maker of the motion.
Yes.
So I would add to your motion, besides the Volkswagen bus front, is the applicant to bring back the full story of the balance of the project with the plant material pallets, and to switch out the internal fingered, the fingers internal to the new parking lot with another variety of more shade rather than the palms.
Could I ask a
And that-
clarification?
And that would be an indefinite continuance?
I suppose it
final?
would.
Yes.
Is that
Yes.
okay with the maker of the motion, the seconder of the motion?
Yes.
Okay, anything else to add? Could we read that back, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair Moore. As it stands right now, it is project design approval with the following comments. The board would like to see further definition, specification, and conditions of the Volkswagen bus entry. And then the applicant shall bring back the full story of the project, including plant material pallets and switching out the internal fingers in the parking lot with another variety of shade tree.
Does that sound correct?
It does to me.
And
Mr.
Mr. Chair, if
Six?
I may add, or ask if if the assumption is to return to the full board.
Yes.
Thank you.
That's a yes. Mr. Mavis, you had a question for
As
us.
far as kind of relating this to the whole project, is it mostly that the frontage is your concern, or the interior, the whole, when you say the whole project, that's,
I think we're interested in the frontage.
that's kind of what I thought. So would photographs from Cliff Drive and from Loma Alta be enough, or do you want us to do,
And the approved plans.
looking at the approved plans? Okay. Because much of this really, as you know, as I said, is inside the right-of-way, and it's a lot of just ground cover, ice plant. So your really
Okay.
perception from the public is you're not going to see much of the rest of the project, but we're happy to suffice.
Great. Anything else? Okay, if we're ready, we can take our vote.
Thank you, Chair Moore. I'll take the roll call vote. Chair Moore?
Yes.
Vice Chair Six?
Yes.
Board Member Anderson?
Yes.
Board Member Black?
Yes.
Board Member Noon?
Yes.
Board Member Olson?
Yes.
Board Member Whalen?
Yes.
Motion passes. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay?
And I believe that,
Mr. Chair, if you could announce the 10-day
Oh,
appeal
yes.
process for this project design approval.
and there is a 10-day appeal period for this process, and you can refer to the instructions on screen.
Thank you.
Okay, and with that, we can adjourn our meeting. Thank you very much.
Sorry.
Oh,
We'll just have
yes,
to
we're going to
power
reopen
through this.
our
I'm sorry, this is my
meeting.
rookie mistake over here.
Oh, that's all right. It's our mistake as well. So the maker, no, I didn't make it. Mr. Olson was the
Mr.
maker.
Olson.
So if you could quickly run through these for
The
us.
project is consistent with design guidelines applicable to the location of the project. It's compatible with the architectural character of the city and the neighborhood. It is appropriate in size, mass, bulk, height, and scale. It's sensitive to adjacent landmarks and historic resources. The public views of the ocean and mountains are not affected, and the use of open space and landscaping is appropriate.
Great. So
I am okay with that.
I think that does it. So we can now adjourn our meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.